In the modern day, few rivalries have remained as prominent as the Greco-Turkish one. Ever since the Greeks achieved their independence from the Ottomans in 1830, they had been very vocal about claiming the lands of the former Byzantine Empire, specifically the lands that were still inhabited by Greeks. This movement would come to be known as the Megali idea and would influence Greek foreign policy for the next century. As a result, Greco-Ottoman relations would be really tense in this period, with many wars taking place between the two powers. Though Greece would achieve minor expansion during this time, an opportunity to realize the greater Megali idea would still not present itself, as a majority of Greek inhabited lands remained under Ottoman rule. The situation would truly escalate in the early 20th century. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution would take place, forcing the Ottoman Sultan to accept a constitution which stripped him from most of his power. Soon, however, it became very clear that the Young Turks were extremely nationalistic and wanted to completely Turkify the nation, which posed a significant threat to Greece's territorial ambitions. In 1914, World War I broke out, with the Ottomans joining the side of the Central Powers. As for Greece, she found herself in a national schism. Some supported King Constantine, who favored neutrality, while others supported the Prime Minister, Eleftherios Venizelos, who favored joining the Entente to take advantage of the decline of the Ottomans. The country would remain divided until 1917, where, with the help of the Entente, Venizelos would set up a government in Thessalonica, before deposing the king and replacing him with his son, Alexander. Thus, Greece entered the First World War on the side of the Entente. World War I would drag for an additional year, which would see Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire collapse, and before long, a revolution in Germany would force the Kaiser to abdicate, putting an end to the conflict. With the Ottoman Empire in total chaos, they would be forced to sign the Armistice of Mudros, which practically allowed the Entente powers to occupy any Turkish land while they were preparing for a peace treaty. It is at this time where the greatest threat to Greece's ambitions would reveal itself: Italy. Ever since Italy fully unified in 1871, they began to draw plans for expansion. Their goal was to make a neo-Roman empire encompassing most of the Mediterranean Sea in a plan known as Mare Nostrum, which put them at direct odds with the Greek Megali idea. As Italy joined the First World War, they received promises of territorial expansion by the Entente, most importantly containing large parts of the Anatolian Peninsula, which included the city of Smyrna. To the Greeks, Italian control over Smyrna was unacceptable, so they sent their navy to the city before the Italians could reach there first. Italy thus responded with landing troops in Antalya, with the Greeks in turn fully occupying Smyrna. Meanwhile, the Entente would finally end up signing the Treaty of Sèvres, destroying the Ottoman Empire in the process. Under the treaty, Greece would gain eastern Thrace and governance over Smyrna, which would get a referendum whether to join Greece or stay with Turkey in 5 years. Constantinople and the Straits would be turned into an international zone, which basically meant the British would take over the city. Armenia and Kurdistan would gain independence, and Italy and France would get major zones of influence inside of the former empire. The Turks, not wanting to see their country being turned into a de facto colony, started brutal guerrilla wars against the Entente. At the same time, in Ankara, Mustafa Kemal would organize a Turkish army preparing to liberate the nation. With this escalation escalation of the conflict, Greece was pissed and began to campaign against Turkey to force them to accept the Treaty of Sèvres. At first, the war went pretty well for Greece, as she managed to push far outside the Smyrna zone she had been given. Around this time, Italy and the Soviets would begin to massively prop up the Turkish nation with weapons in hopes that they can defeat Greece. On October 25th, 1920, however, disaster would strike as King Alexander would be bitten by a monkey, which shortly after killed him. Instability would ensue as Constantine returned and became the country's king again. In parallel, Greece would achieve a major victory by capturing the cities of Eskişehir, Kütahya and Afyon-Karahisar, and it looked as if the Greek army was ready to march on Ankara and end the war. However, the Entente, not too keen in seeing the return of Constantine nor the extreme success Greece was achieving, would start to push back against the Greek war effort. The Greeks would try to march forward, but at this point it was too late, as the Battle of Sakarya would mark a decisive Turkish victory and the Greeks would be pushed back. The French then would return all of their occupied territory to Turkey and begin to aid them in their war effort. By August of 1922, there were no more negotiations to be had. Turkey would chase down the retreating Greek army, resulting in the capture of Smyrna in September of the same year. There, the Turks would commit horrific atrocities against the Christian populations, and the city would be burned to the ground. At this point, the Treaty of Lausanne would be signed, which basically finalized the borders of the Republic of Turkey. Greece would permanently lose influence in Asia Minor, and the situation between the two countries has remained tense even up to the present day. So, what if that didn't happen? What if Greece managed to defeat Turkey, forcing them to accept the Treaty of Sèvres? Well, there are several ways we can make this happen. First of all, we need to ensure Entente backing throughout the whole duration of the war. The return of King Constantine after Alexander's death was a major blow to Greco-Entente relations and would pave the way for Greece's full defeat later on. In this timeline, we would ensure Alexander's survival and the continued stability inside of Greece, which should allow the Entente to be much more sympathetic towards the country. At the same time, I expect the Italians and the Soviets to strengthen their support for Turkey, supplying them with arms to use against the Greeks. However, this would not stop them from capturing Eskişehir and the other cities like they did in our timeline. Now, at this point in the war, the Greeks were planning on making one last decisive push on Ankara and ending the war. However, the British decided to stop them from doing so, which allowed the Turks to regroup back in their capital. From then, when Greece reached the Sakarya River, the Turks managed to score a decisive victory and push the Greeks out of the vicinity of Ankara for good. So, in this timeline, we're going to have the British approve of the Greek plans, and by skill and luck, the Greeks would reach Ankara before any serious Turkish army could form. As soon as the Greek army enters Ankara, the young Turkish government will be disbanded, and the Ottoman Sultan would be forced to return to the country under close Greek vision. As a subsequent result, the Treaty of Sèvres would be rewritten to match Greece's expectations. Italy would have to retreat from their occupied territories, while the zone of Smyrna would be expanded. Meanwhile, France and Britain would annex their zones of occupations and Great Armenia would gain independence. And so, as the map of Anatolia is redrawn, we enter into the interwar period with a strengthened Greece, a crumbled Ottoman state, and an angry Italy. So, what's next? But before we continue, if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. I would like to thank you guys so much for the 1000 subscribers. This is so awesome. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. That's all I have to say for today. Let's get on back with the video. In the aftermath of the war, I see Greece attempting to recover relations with the Ottoman Empire, bringing the two countries closer. It's pretty logical that Greece would try to ally herself with the Ottomans, as their their territorial disputes have been resolved in Greece's favor, and after all, the Sultan was made to return under Greek influence. Meanwhile, Italy would be furious about their defeat. Their little Roman Empire has collapsed before it even properly started, and that's all thanks to those darn Greeks who have somehow managed to create a more impressive empire than them. Ultranationalism's rise is undoubtable, and in fact I expect there to be a lot more support for it, with the hope to undo Italy's humiliation. Italian focus would thus be shifted towards the Balkan much sooner, with the aim to restore Italian greatness over the Mediterranean. However, for the time being, nothing much would be done, as Mussolini still tries to consolidate control over the country. As for Greece, their economic situation would improve over time, with them not having to deal with a bunch of Greek refugees fleeing from Anatolia to the mainland. Furthermore, with Alexander in power, it's very possible that the British, and especially the French, would be willing to help the Greek kingdom economically. Wait, what sort of bullcrap is this? Greece having a stable economy? That's completely unrealistic. Speaking of the Western powers, the Greek victory would change relatively little about them. Sure, Britain now has control over Constantinople, but what benefit could access to the Black Sea really provide? The same argument is true for Germany, as the scenario wouldn't fundamentally change the trajectory of the country, and ultranationalism would still rise. Italy would see to cooperate sooner with Germany in hopes that together they can maybe defeat the Western powers. At the same time, Greece would find herself in a national schism. Again, after their victory at the Greco-Turkish War, a great question has arose. After the war, Greece gained all majority Greek territories with one exception, Constantinople. Many Greeks saw the inclusion of Constantinople to Greece as the final step in the realization of the Megali idea and the ultimate restoration of the Byzantine Empire. Britain, of course, would be unwilling to cede the city of the world's desire to some mid-sized power in the Balkan, as they consider it too valuable to give it up. As such, this would spark a debate inside of Greece whether to go against the British in hopes of claiming Constantinople, or to remain with the power that had given them so much already. I expect the nationalists to be deeply popular inside the country. However, I don't see them managing to win any serious civil conflict in the long term. Simply put, with the Italian threat from the west and the frankly paranoid Soviet Union in the east, which still hopes to conquer Armenia, Greece would reluctantly join up with the British and the French, with the vague hope that Britain might just award Constantinople to them at some point. Of course, that's if the British even do that at all, which I consider unlikely, at least in the short term. However, as all of this is unfolding in Greece, Germany would have Anschlussed Austria, invaded Czechoslovakia, and now looks set to conquer all of Poland. After an unexpected non-aggression pact is signed with the Soviets, Eastern Europe would be divided between the two great powers. As Poland falls, the Soviets would launch twin invasions of Finland and Armenia. These invasions would be catastrophic for the Soviets, as the Armenians are silently supported by the Greeks and to a lesser extent by the Turks. On top of that, the Finnish are in a much better position than in our timeline, due to the fact that Soviet troops had to be redirected to the Caucasus. The Soviets would have to settle for minor gains in Finland while being forced out of most of outer Armenia. However, trouble doesn't stop here, as the Italians would begin their campaign against Greece. Of course, just like in our timeline, Greece would humiliate the Italians, which would force the German troops to redirect to the Balkan. With Greece falling to the Axis and the German armies being in spinning distance of Constantinople, Turkey would be engulfed in chaos. Several actors attempt to negotiate entry into the Axis while others support neutrality. The Sultan, not wanting to risk his power being removed, would join the Allies in the hopes of getting support from the British to legitimize his regime further. Without a doubt, the Turks will try to resist, but ultimately they would be occupied by the Axis. Constantinople and the Straits would manage to resist occupation for now, although the Bulgarians and the Germans would place the city under siege. At the same time, Operation Barbarossa would begin shortly after the conquest of the Ottomans, with the Axis performing slightly worse than in our timeline. This is mainly because Germany would have been a few months late to the whole invasion, and they would have also been tasked with occupying a bunch more land, most of which is populated by proud Turks who frankly wanted the Germans out. Although I don't really expect this to alter the general course of the war too much. So, as the African front collapses and the Soviets begin to push the Germans back, the British would begin to advance into Turkey, liberating the nation. The Soviets would take advantage of the situation to occupy all of the Armenian territory. Germany soon collapses and Europe would be redrawn. However, for the purposes of this scenario, we would just focus on the Balkan and Anatolia. The Ottomans would be restored and they would be given territory from French Syria and minor territories from the British-held Bosphorus as compensation. Armenia in turn would be annexed into the Soviet Union, as the Soviets would have no interest in retreating from such land. Greece, just like in our timeline, would fall into civil war, and after the royalists would emerge victorious, Greece would ultimately gain the Dodecanese from Italy. World War II has come to an end, and it seems that the Balkans would head into a new peaceful period. However, as decolonization starts to take place around the world, the matter of Constantinople would be brought up again. The Greeks in the city would start to demand the British withdrawing so they can achieve unification with their motherland. Around this time, Greece would also find herself subjected to a coup d'etat, with the colonels taking power, straining relations with the Western powers even more. The future of Constantinople remains uncertain, and only time could tell in which hands the city would ultimately fall under. But hey, at this point we've went too far into the scenario to continue making further predictions. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as well as commenting any scenario idea you might want me to cover. Again, thank you guys so much for the 1000 subscribers. It means a ton to me. Like, I couldn't thank you enough. Like, next goal 5000 subscribers, wink wink? No? Okay.